Hi everyone, Magnus here, and today I have got an 80-minute edited supercut of the Accelerated Dragon theory stream that I did earlier today, which was around 2.5 hours long, so I've condensed it for you guys to just over 80 minutes, so I hope you enjoy, find it useful. Timestamps are included if you're looking for something specific, but let's move directly into the theory. To play. I've got the opening tree up because this is one of my main openings that I play with black. So I'm going to flip the board here, and we can see all of the different openings that white has tried against me. It's a lot, but you can also see the most common here on the right hand side. You can see that these are the most important ones that you should want to cover quickly and try and make sure you're most comfortable in, because you're going to get the most reward for learning these systems. So knight to f3 is important to look at. It's important to look at knight to c3, pawn to c3, d4 immediately Smith-Morrow, but as I'll show later, this actually transposes back into the Alapin with what I like to play. And some of the worst moves like bishop to c4, we can learn how to treat that, as well as pawn to f4. So I think these moves are all of the ones that we would like to take a look at today. For you'll take with your d-pawn, and after their knight recaptures, your knight is already pressuring in the center, and you can go for g6 and bishop to g7 with a quick attack on the center of the board with your bishop. So this is the whole point of the Accelerated Dragon. Additionally, the Accelerated Dragon has the benefit that you haven't played pawn to d6 yet. And because you haven't played pawn to d6, you have the opportunity to play pawn to d5 in one move. And if you can do that, you'll have saved a move and your position is simply better. Okay, so the most common move here played by white is in fact pawn to d4. You will capture this pawn. They will take back with their knight, unless they want to play some kind of gambit line with c3, but this is not very impressive. I will cover this. If they play c3, you actually just play knight to f6, and you'll transpose into lines that we discuss later on in this video, or stream, I guess. But after you take on d4, so after the knight takes on d4, I'm liking pawn to g6. This is the main line of the Accelerated Dragon. The point is, like I said, you're going to go bishop to g7 and you're going to attack the knight. And we haven't got into any of the big traps of the Accelerated yet. This is pretty much just setup time. But we're going to be covering all of that, all the interesting stuff. I know there were quite a few people yesterday that were interested in this, so hopefully they will join shortly. Okay, so after g6, like I said, the point to go bishop g7. A lot of newer players just go knight to c3 here. Now, the absolute best approach is pawn to c4, but I will cover an antidote to that as well. But knight to c3 is very common, so we're going to cover knight to c3 first. And on knight to c3, you're going bishop to g7. Thank you. Ashulari, if you have any questions about the opening, then do ask them. Absolutely ask them. Trying to make this interactive as possible, so that everyone can get their questions out, and that way you'll hopefully remember the opening a little bit better, and that will be very useful. But yes, today we are covering the Accelerated Dragon Sicilian. Okay, so bishop to g7 attacks the knight, right? So white can either defend the knight, move the knight here, or move the knight here. Most players defend the knight because they want to develop with tempo, play queen d2, and long castle, because that's what they're taught to do against the regular dragon with d6. Now I'll show you the difference. You go knight to f6, and as you've noticed, we have not moved this d-pawn yet. And we're very much not afraid of e5, mostly because it's not possible at the moment. And a very common mistake here for white is, it should be good, Queen d2. Queen d2 is a common mistake. And any time it's possible to go knight to g4, and there's a bishop on e3, you should go for it. Knight g4. And the great thing about knight g4 is that it also covers the h6 square, right? So there's no possibility of bishop to h6. Okay, and if they just castle, say, all of a sudden, knight takes on e3. How can you play for the win with the Sicilian dragon? That is a good question. We play for the win with the Sicilian dragon by having a better structure, breaking in the center, opening up the dragon bishop, and then winning with often a queenside pressure or a queenside attack. And a really cool thing about the accelerated dragon is that it's actually objectively bad for white to castle queenside. White is often much worse if they castle queenside with the standard f3 Yugoslav attack stuff that they would do against the normal dragon. But in this specific position, because we've captured the dark squared bishop, we're simply much better. I mean, in this example, the knight is also dropping, so they would have to take with the pawn, which is very ugly. Then you can play a move like knight to e5, and the horse is simply dominating all the pawns. You're going to castle, and you can even transpose back into the regular dragon, where you just play something like d6, because white no longer has an attack with just 2 pawns. The reason why the regular dragon is scary is because white has the f-pawn as well, to bolster the attack with f3 and try and chip away at your pawns after you play something like h5. So I'll just give an example here. Let's say bishop to e2, castles, h4. You can go, I mean, even h5, and let's say they don't get g4 in, you get d6 in. Once you get control over this g4 square, white will never have an attack. White will never have an attack. You can plant a piece on the g4 square, bring your queen out, bring your rook over, a6, b5. You just push white over with the standard dragon ideas. So I think someone asked earlier, where does the accelerated Sicilian and the regular dragon crossover? That is the one occasion where there is crossover. If they castle queenside and they lose their dark squared bishop, you just get a fantastic Sicilian dragon. Okay, but most people will be playing f3 because they don't want to run into knight to g4 to attack the bishop. But f3 is in fact a mistake, and this is very important because after short castles, queen to d2. Queen d2 is a normal move from people that don't have a lot of experience with the accelerated dragon, because they don't realize the huge difference that we haven't played d6 yet. Now I keep harping on about this, but it's very important. Okay, because we haven't played d6 yet, we can immediately strike with pawn to d5. And after long castles, we can play a capture in the center. And after they capture, you can play a move like queen to c7, bishop to g4 is coming. But you play queen c7, you bring your rook, you often trade this knight in the center, play bishop to e6 and go for a checkmate. Anyway, we're back to the endgame that I was talking about. By the way, if they take with the pawn here, they actually are much worse. There's a nice trap here, knight to g4. I had a win that was quite nice in this game, in a game where you go e5, bishop g5, f6, bishop h4, bishop h6. You win the rook. So if they take back with the pawn, you can actually win a rook by force by removing their bishop from the diagonal. And if they try and defend the bishop with the rook, can anyone come up with the winning solution? It's knight takes and bishop h6, exactly. Okay, so we're gonna run it all the way back. I believe some people were asking about the Maroczy bind. There was some interest in that one. So we're gonna take a look at the Maroczy bind now. And this is probably one of the main reasons, along with the Rossolimo, why people don't like to play the accelerated dragon Sicilian. So I'm going to cover both c4 and bishop to b5. Starting with c4, I have my recommendation here. And I feel strongly that black should avoid playing bishop g7 immediately. Now, the reasoning behind this is that if you play bishop to g7, they will play bishop to e3, and now what happens is that once you've taken the center, they will take back with the bishop, And if you take again and again, they will get a very, very strong queen in the center, supporting the bind, and it's extremely, extremely hard to break out. You're going to have to suffer with d6, bishop e6. Same plans, but it's just a worse position. And yeah, like I said, the reason it's a worse position, they can take with the bishop. This is very important. If they can take with the bishop, you don't want to trade on e5. See? Because now, if these pieces come off, their queen gets to the center. And if you play something like this, like the knight out, then they're going to play e5 at some point, and the bishop's already supporting the attack on your king. So okay, I think that we should avoid bishop g7, even though it's the main move. But there's actually a very strong sideline. I think it's getting more popular lately. Yeah, knight to f6 is much more popular now than bishop g7. And knight to f6. The purpose is we attack the e4 pawn, force them to go knight to f3. If they play something like pawn to f3, then you can just take in the center. Oops. You can take in the center, play bishop g7, castle your king, and this will transpose into the other lines. There is an objectively slightly better way to treat this, but you can absolutely cut your lines and memorization down by just learning one line very well, and if you're very comfortable in that, then you'll do well. Okay, so knight f6, almost everyone plays knight to c3. They defend their pawn in the center, and here you have an option. You have two moves, a little bit of a, you have a split between two decisions. You can play the objectively slightly better move, knight takes on d4. This one guarantees a good position. Alternatively, you can play a much more tricky move, pawn to d6. Now, I really like pawn to d6. I think it's great for anyone that's not super well versed with the Maroczy bind and they're just playing it because they've heard that it's the best line. Because if white knows what they're doing against d6, they'll play the move knight to c2, and you will not be a very happy camper because you won't get the position that you wanted to. They'll get their knights back, they'll play b3, their regular setup, all is well and good, except you don't get to exchange these knights. And it actually turns out that this knight on c6 is a bit clunky. Now, yes, it can go to e5 and pressure the pawn, but it often gets in the way of the other knight when you just want the c-file to be open. Okay? However, if your opponents don't know knight to c2, and even if they do, it's not the end of the world. You can still live, and you can still get a good game. But if they don't know knight c2, and they do play bishop to e3, then they're going to be in for a world of trouble. Because you have, once again, got the move knight to g4. Now, this is an extremely common motif in the accelerated. If there's one thing that you take away from this lesson, it would be knight to g4. I would hope it would be knight g4. And the reasoning behind knight to g4 is that you're attacking their dark squared bishop, which is basically critical to the white position to oppose your dark squared bishop that is about to be very strong down this diagonal. Now, if they don't move this bishop, of course, next move, you're going to take it. So queen d2, takes. Black is much better. Dark squared bishop, powering down the diagonal, queen b6, castles. You can trade in the center, go bishop e6, bring a rook to the c-file. Like, black is just significantly better with this dark squared bishop. Borderline winning, I would say. But obviously people are not going to let you have this. Okay? They're going to try and move the bishop a lot of the time, which is actually a worse move. Because now, after queen to b6, you're actually attacking the knight, threatening checkmate, and attacking the b2 pawn. Now, of course, if they take, you checkmate them. If they play f3, counter-attacking your knight, you can capture, they capture, you can capture their queen, they play rook takes, and even simple bishop g7. Or first, actually, you should capture the pawn. But you first would capture the pawn, you could even trade, and black, once again, much better, bishop pretty much unopposed on this long diagonal. This pawn is blockaded, it cannot move forward, and you're going to win a very straightforward positional game with castles bringing your rook to the c file, a6, b5. Okay? However, this is not the most likely to happen. Instead, a lot of your opponents will notice the carnage that's coming their way. They'll realize that they've made a mistake with bishop e3, and they're in big trouble with queen b6. So they'll try and bail out with the move knight takes on c6. Okay? Knight takes on e6 is the best move, but we don't in fact take on c6, because then there's some, actually no, it's not bishop d4 that's good, but they can actually just retreat the bishop all the way back, and then our knight looks a little bit silly. Almost winning position, exactly. Instead of this, can anyone come up with a counter-attacking response that black has to take full control of the game here? Volume. Yes, you take on e3. Exactly. You take on e3, and it's actually not messy, and I'll explain to you how you can force a very, very strong winning endgame with this. I actually played this in a blitz game over the board recently. You think knight g4 was invented by Byrne? Maybe. But yes, knight takes. If they take your queen, you take their queen. Knight takes on f7 is in fact a blunder, because you have knight takes on c3, and you have now captured an extra piece, and if they want to extricate their knight, you will take on e4. Sorry, no, you won't take on e4 in that situation. You can just go knight a4 and whatever. Your knight escapes. If they recapture your knight, you'll take their knight on f7. You're completely winning. You're up a piece. So obviously they won't do that. Instead, they will play rook takes. They will play rook takes on d1, and then you will take here. Now, you might be thinking that the moves like e5 and c5 look very scary, but they're not, okay? And I have a reason for you. The reason is that after e5, this is actually extremely difficult, by the way. This is a really hard concept to come up with. I didn't come up with this concept on my own. I basically just looked at it with an engine earlier, like back when I was learning the dragon. But I'd be very impressed if anyone can come up with the correct positional idea, how black gets an advantage in an endgame. Bishop g7. It is bishop g7, yes. That's correct. And the idea is that after e takes d6, what's the critical move here? Bishop g7 is the idea, yes. How does black get an advantage? Now this is going to be super counterintuitive for a lot of people, because people love their dark square bishop. Exactly. You take on c3, and now there's one more move. This move looks also pretty ridiculous. This move looks pretty ridiculous as well, but it's the only way to keep a good advantage for black. So there's one more move in the continuation. Take on c3, exactly. We've taken on c3. As you can see, white now has terrible pawn structure. Bishop e6, exactly. Bishop e6, they take on e7, and now, you may notice, white's up a pawn, but white has no way to defend these c-pawns. It's not quite pawn b6. It is bishop to e6, Repton was correct. It is bishop e6, because now, after, let's say, white develops something natural, you can move your rook to the c-file, and you're going to notice white has a terrible endgame. White has a horrible endgame to play. Pretty much, if we get our golden setup, okay, our golden setup here is that we will have our rook on c7. We'll have, so let's just have white continue moving. Now white's just kind of stuck making some waiting moves. And okay, this is our golden setup. If you can go for this in this specific endgame, this is what you want. The pawn on b6 and this pawn here. You want your chain f7 to h5, right? And then you're going to capture here, captures, and I'll let white play some slightly better moves. I'll have it like this. Okay. So now, sorry, rook d2 to cut off the king. So now what I'm trying to point out is that after rook to d7 here, you have rook a4. So this is why b6 is very useful to play in this position. Now after rook goes back to b7, you play king e7. You centralize your king. The rook can shuffle between c4. Black will win this if you enjoy playing your rook endgames and you play them well. So like king here, king, rook a3, rook c2, super passive. You put white's rook stuck to passivity on the c2 square. Your king is going to run in. You're going to win one of the pawns, and then you're going to be up 2 pawns. You can push your majority before you do this. Stay patient. Always stay patient in the endgame. But you can start to push your pawns first, bring the king closer. Eventually, you'll win this pawn. Then you can move your majority down the board and win the game. Obviously, there's some technique in it still. But going right back, this is your ideal way to play this setup. If you can get this structure, b6 and a7, I really think that there are fantastic chances for black to win. You're absolutely playing with no risk. Black is clearly better. But this is a game where everything went exactly right in that system. Like I said, I've only really picked up the knowledge of this in the last couple months. So when everything goes perfect and you get your endgame grind that you want, this is the kind of thing that you can get. So I've got the game review up right now. You can see it was a high accuracy game. I got everything I wanted. This is something I prepared already, so I didn't really have to think too much. So we get the Maroczy, knight f6, d6. We get everything that goes according to plan. You beat an NM on Lead Chess. Nice. Nice. It's always good to get your first title victory. So here you see bishop g7. All of the prep comes on the board. They decided not to take on e7 here, which is definitely reasonable. Definitely reasonable. Instead, they played their bishop out. I just brought my rook. I played the standard moves, the moves that made sense. Won the pawn. Defended the pawn. And you're going to notice I got the exact setup that I'm talking about. And another thing that's really useful to know, that this endgame, if you have same colored bishops, this endgame where white has the split pawns, same colored light square bishops, it's pretty much winning. Pretty much winning for black. Now, you say 95% in blitz is crazy, but it's a lot easier when you have your setup and you know your end game that you're trying to get. So once I got to this position, all you need is one imbalance, guys. One imbalance. We've got the 2 connected pawns. We have the better structure. Our king can centralize fairly quickly. One pawn on a light square in a same colored bishop endgame. It's winning. It's winning. One pawn on a light square. If you put this, if they were to have a table base that would go high enough, I reckon it would say this is winning for black. And the only reason it's winning, which is crazy, is that this pawn is on a4. So as soon as I saw this pawn go to a4, I'm playing rook c4. I want that bishop endgame. And the reason is, that pawn is on a light square, and it can never get off the light square. Right? So these pawns, they can all easily mobilize to the dark squares. My pawns over here, already on the dark squares. They have a pawn on the light square, and it's gonna be hell. Okay? There you go, king e3, already, game over. Bishop b3, exactly. Zevil is correct. They didn't play the only move to stay in the game, which is bishop to d1. But even after this, my king activates, I play bishop d4, f6, g5, h6, all the pawns go on the light squares. And you can play this game absolutely forever. Your opponent is going to be so sad. You put the bishop on c6, you pressure this pawn forever. Exactly. Bishop to e1. Wait, you're saying bishop d1, bishop b3? It doesn't even matter. They can do whatever they want with their bishop. The point is that this pawn will always remain on a light square, and you can camp your bishop. You can camp your bishop on You can camp your bishop on c6. When hanging pawns, gain 1 pawn in a middle game, he says the game is over. That's funny. Yeah, I wouldn't say the game is over, but what I would say is that you can grind this forever, which is very different. Which is that you're going to be having all the fun. This is the kind of game where it's win-draw. And by win-draw, I mean like you can play this for 50, 100, 150 moves. You're never going to lose. It's impossible. Okay? However, you're going to be winning like 70 to 80% of these games. And if people like don't know what they're doing, like in this blitz game, for example, like my opponent instantly cracked. Instantly. They allow bishop to b3, and now the pawn falls. How can you win that position? Can you show us? Now, it's not about immediately winning. This is actually a really common misconception in chess, so I'll show you what I would start doing. You guys can suggest moves for white if you want, but I'll show you how I would do it. You just have to take things one step at a time. You don't win instantly in a long endgame, okay? You start improving your king. Let's say they improve their king. You continue to improve your king. If they try and come over here, maybe you play f6. You stop their king from coming in, okay? And by the way, as you can see, the engine's already collapsing. The engine's already collapsing. g3 is what the engine's suggesting. I would play bishop e6, okay? Now I can play g5, h6. They play this. Actually, they shouldn't play that. Apparently this is already borderline lost because my king's infiltrating to c4, by the way. And if they go bishop to e2, there's bishop to b3. So this is already insanely hard to hold. Only move is king e3, king c4, king d2. Okay. You don't even have to do anything. Just continue to improve your position. Take it slow. Take it slow. Right? Something like here. Takes. g5. Like f4, sorry. And you could go something like bishop to f5. You can play bishop d7. You can harass this pawn. Like I said, you don't have to do anything drastic here. White's just going to run out of moves. a5. They can't check you because then you'll go here. So they have to shuffle with their bishop. They have to maintain. Okay? And then, let's say bishop f5. They don't have access to this square or this square. They're in Zugzwang. So in these kind of same colored bishop endgames, there's so much room for just shuffling and noticing how your opponent's holding on. Now, if you realize that the linchpin, the only reason why this is bad for white is because they have a pawn on a4 that's a light squared pawn and isolated. If this pawn was on b2, white draws. White is fine. Takes and g4. You're suggesting takes g4, bishop g6. I maintain control of c2. If bishop to c2, bishop takes c2, king takes c2, king runs over. I win this pawn. King c5, king c2, b5. Takes. King here, check, here. King and pawn endgames, easy win. You have to be able to transition smoothly in the endgame. What are you saying? Bishop to e4? Yeah, it doesn't matter where you put the bishop. You just put the bishop somewhere on this diagonal. That way, they'll be forced. They relinquish control. And then finally, everything collapses. The a4 pawn is gone. And once the a4 pawn drops, it's a super straightforward win. You literally just push it up the board. They'll have to sack for it. The game is over. Now, of course, in opposite color bishop endgames, you could win 1 pawn, 2 pawns, and the game still goes on. Same color bishop endgame. In a same color bishop endgame, it's even worse most times than a king and pawn endgame. Same color bishops, being up a pawn is a win. Almost all the time. So, this is just one way that you could convert the position. When I see this, I want to put my pawns on the dark squares. Then I want to try and infiltrate my king to pressure their pawn. And eventually, you might notice, okay, the bishop doesn't have many squares. If I can optimize my pieces, then I can force the bishop out of squares, put them in Zugzwang, which is a very, very common motif in same color bishop endgames. Opponent goes in Zugzwang, infiltrate, pawn drops. So you have your one weakness to pressure. There is the principle of two weaknesses, so it might have been better to try and create a weakness over here as well. But keeping one pawn on the board over here was crucial. Anyway, if you want to see how the game actually ended, I basically just won a pawn. Oh yeah, this was nasty as well. Bishop to e8 traps the bishop. Like, if they just move their king somewhere, there's bishop f7, the bishop gets trapped. So I just played bishop g8. They played bishop g8, and then put all my pawns on the dark squares. I started pushing over here. Continued pushing. I noticed the pin, there was a tactic, b5. They tried to play c5, but king e7 just maintained contact with the bishop. After the exchange, I played b4. I anchored my pawn here, so they can't take this one because then that one will run. Then I just waited, went over, took this pawn, and then I just walked over, took the other pawn, and made a queen. They resigned. So yeah. Okay. So we're going to go back to the regular analysis board here. Knight to g4 was the move, as pointed out by Reptom earlier. That would win the dark squared bishop, and you'd have a great game. So people on bishop to e3, castles, they go queen d2. And here you have an option. The one that I am most familiar with, and prefer the most, is bishop e6. Back to queen d2 in the Maroczy. So these kind of moves you do memorize. So you memorize opening moves. Well, you don't memorize opening moves necessarily. This is a lesson on the accelerated dragon. We're currently covering the Maroczy bind because this is one of the biggest problems that people have with the accelerated dragon. A lot of people don't like playing against it, so I'm trying to make it more consumable. b6 bishop to b7 is unfortunately a mistake in playing the game. After b6, f3, bishop b7, your bishop is going to bite down this pawn chain, and it will never be able to have any fun. It doesn't quite work because you don't have f5 as a pawn break. Okay, for that reason, we put our bishop on the somewhat counterintuitive square on e6. It targets the c4 pawn. Now you might say, b3, the bishop's biting on the pawn chain again. Well, immediately there's a tactic. So they have to deal with that first. There's a pin on the rook. Good motif to know. But even if they play it well, rook c1. Is the Caro-Kann good? I think the Caro-Kann is a good opening. But I am teaching the accelerated dragon at the moment. Personally, I think it's a much better opening for beginners because you learn really good positional concepts and also good attacking chess. I feel like the Caro-Kann can lead to a bit of autopilot, which is always a concern for me. I don't like autopilot chess because that way you don't really think about what your opponent's doing, and if you don't keep track of what your opponent's doing, you can get in serious hot water because you're not looking for tactics. Rook c8. At some point you are going to play rook c8, but this is extremely important. You're going to move the f rook to c8, and I'm going to show you why. Okay, so after rook c1, your move is queen a5 because you want the f rook on c8, and also your queen is very useful in escorting this pawn push a6 b5. a6 b5 is the critical, it's the crux, it's the only reason why this line in the Maroczy is playable. You're scared that white long castles. Yes, I will show a line where white long castles, but it's not bad in like the Sicilian because you're playing the dragon, which, like I said, means you get to play d5 rather than d6. Okay, queen a5. All right, white can castle. You play rook f to c8, and then after f3, which is these are the standard moves: f3, b3, a6, b3. I don't know what you're spamming there, chess tape, but could you please not do that? Chess tape. I'll have to time you out if you do that. Okay, you're just spamming blankness. I have to time you out if you keep that. Okay, it looks like they might have stopped. They've stopped. Okay. So, what I was trying to point out here is that the big difference between moving the A rook and the F rook is after knight to D5. Wait, sorry. I'll have it like this. After knight to D5, don't spam. Yeah, I agree. They seem to have stopped though. Wait. Okay, here. Knight to D5. The critical idea is that queen takes on D2. If you didn't have queen takes on D2, he's in his blank soul era. Okay. So, if we didn't have queen takes on D2 and we had to play queen D8, this would be very, very bad. This would be very bad. Because our queen would have to return to a passive square. They have knight B6, that's a fork, that's one thing. This would be a bad position. So instead, we have queen takes on D2. Now, you might be thinking, knight takes D2, intermezzo, king to F8. However, they have to take back the queen, and because we have king F8, we can take the knight. If we were to move the other rook, if we were to move the C rook, that'd be a huge mistake, okay? And the reason is, F3, A6, knight D5. And now, knight D5 is very different. Queen takes D2, knight takes E2, king H8. And you're going to notice we have no way to get to their knight, right? And now they've just stolen a pawn, their knight's attacking our rook, therefore we cannot win back this pawn, we would have to move the knight or something. And actually this is still equal because there's a pin, so you can play something like takes, takes, takes. But white is better. White has the two bishops, and this isn't what you want to go for, okay? So always remember to move your F rook in the Maroczy bind. We play rook Fc8. Now there's a check and knight F8. Yeah, king F8. Okay. The main system that you're going to get though is F3, A6, B3, and pawn to B5. Now, if you guys would be interested, I can actually show you a game I played against a FIDE master in classical chess. You have a hard time deciding. Well, you won't have a hard time anymore because it's the F rook. It's always the F rook in the Maroczy bind. But if you guys would be interested, I have a game that I played in this line against a FIDE master over the board. I can show that one as an example. I got a really good position. But I kind of choked it, and then I made a draw with them. But yeah, if people be interested in that, I can show it. So now after b5, this move actually is tactically, the pawn is tactically safe. Now I have showed this last stream. They take on b5, you take, knight takes, queen takes, takes, and I'm just going to quickly go through this. If rook takes c1, whoops, what's going on? Sorry, rook takes on a2, rook c1 takes, there's a skewer, rook d1, bishop e6, knight here. And I know that people from last stream, I'm just going to quickly go through this. This would be your line, and you would win on b3. So tactically, you just have to know that taking the b5 pawn doesn't work for them if they take with the knight, and if they take with the bishop, you sack the rook on c3, and then you win the bishop. You have two pieces, and you should win. Okay, I'm going to try and find that game that I played. Okay, so I've now recropped. Hopefully you guys can see everything. I was playing with the black pieces against the FIDE master from, I don't really know where they were from, to be honest. Okay, so they started with e4, c5. I've also got the, I don't know if you can see the rating graph. open study. Let's do that. No, that doesn't work. Hold on. Okay, there we go. So now I can turn on the engine. As you can see, this was an accelerated dragon. They went for the Maroczy bind. You used to play c5, e6 Sicilian and Khan Sicilian, but never played the dragon. I would, like I said, I'd really recommend the dragon. I mean, if I got a better position against a FIDE master, and then I ended up drawing them, of course, but this just shows it does work at all levels. So they go for bishop to e2. Like I said, I took on the center because I didn't feel like going for the trappy line, because I felt like that could go wrong. Castles. Queen. They end up playing queen d3, which is non-standard. But I play the regular moves because they do work still. I go for queen a5. They develop their rook. I play my f rook over here. They play the move b3. Makes sense. I play a6 to go b5, which is the standard idea. And they play this weird move, queen to b1. So they spend quite a long time on this. I think they were not very happy with the position. So they played queen b1. And instead of playing the thematic b5, there was some serious chaos with the move pawn to b4 and queen to a3, rook c2 and bishop c1 that I saw during the game, and I was like, I don't know what's going on, and I didn't want to get involved. I saw a4. Actually, no, I think I was looking at knight g4 during the game, but I was just really confused what was going on here. I didn't want to go for it. So instead of going for this b5 move, I played knight g4. Conduct a beginners subscribers tournament. I could do different rating categories, I guess. I don't know if I have enough subscribers for that. But yes. Anyway, I played knight g4 to go after their bishop here. After quite a long think, I think. Yeah, it was like 10-15 minute think. Because I was really calculating b5, b4, queen a3. And it was looking crazy. So after knight g4, actually there was like a ridiculous line, I think, is why it justified b5. Was it like here, 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 rook c2? I can't remember it. Oh yeah, it was a5. A5 is absurd. Like what is the engine even saying? This doesn't make any sense. And then you win the e pawn. But anyway, so I didn't go for that. I went for knight g4, takes, and then I went for the simplification because if I didn't do this, they would plant their knight in the center and I would lose. Yeah, there are a couple under 1,000 viewers, I think. So anyway, after bishop g4, I took on c3. They took on e6. I do chess coaching. Fe6. And now it's same color bishops in this fairly equal position. I was okay with it. I felt like maybe I could have had a bit more, but I wasn't too upset playing this against an FM. They went queen d3. I played bishop f6. The reason behind that is I want to keep my e7 pawn protected, and if f4, if f4, I wasn't too concerned. I was just going to play moves like king g7, play for b5, and eventually break the position open. So they played rook c2, which is kind of a waiting move. I played the move rook c6 because I wanted to double my rooks and play b5. This seemed like the thematic move. I doubled my rooks. And they played f5. So they started some aggressive attack here. Maybe I could launch a course? Maybe, I don't know. I do know Samarena, yeah. He's a very famous, I think is he an Indian comedian and also chess? I know he's a chess guy, he does a lot of chess stuff. Could we, yeah, like preferably, I'd like to have the chat remain in English. Otherwise I can't really tell what people are saying. And that just has like some moderation problems. But yeah. Okay, So after f5, queen e5 is a pretty critical move because you need to guard the e6 pawn. But also after queen e5, f e6, I was going to go b5. And the reason why you've played queen e5 now is because I've crossed the b pawn, and now pawn to b5 is playable. Because if I hadn't moved my queen over, then the pawn would go to b5, and it would trap my queen on the side of the board. Actually, this is what happened. So they played f e6, I went b5. They put their queen here. I took. They took. Then I traded queens. Then I grabbed the pawn. And we end up with this endgame where black is slightly better. Because these pawns, while they are on the opposite color, my pawns are much more easily defended by the bishop. And my rook can target their pawns on a nice square. So they played bishop h6. Rook h4 is the only move because I have to kick their rook, then their bishop off this strong diagonal, otherwise I will get checkmated. Then I played rook h5 to target their pawn. Someone has a chessboard, yeah. Apparently g4 is the best move, but that just seems to obviously allow the rook to take. And I eventually started expanding with these pawns over here to stop them going from like h3, g4, and my plan was I wanted to just move my king up, move the pawn up, and then I was going to try and activate, but unfortunately, I decided, so I was pushing, I was getting a good game, but I kind of just had a bit of a cop-out here, traded the rooks and made a draw, which is pretty sad, because after king e2, I could have just played this move, and moved my rook here, and then apparently the king can make progress here, and take the pawn. But anyway, as you can see, I did get a better endgame against the FIDE master. The white position was neutralized, the Maroczy bind was survived, and it didn't go too badly. Okay, so that's enough of that game. I think that might be one of my higher rated draws. But yeah. You thought it was winning? No, I didn't think it was winning. We were both quite low on time. I only had 3 minutes and they had 2 minutes, but I obviously should have kept the rooks on. I didn't actually. I thought it was winning for a brief second because I thought that they wouldn't be able to defend the pawns. But as long as they maintain the diagonal, it's not a problem. So I kind of just made a bit of a cop out and made a draw. But I'm not going to do that next time. I'm always fighting for the win from now on. No more respect for the masters. Okay. Let's go back to the analysis board. So I think we've pretty much covered the Maroczy bind. There's not a whole lot more you need to know. So we're going to go back. Okay. Now we're going to look at the Rossolimo. Bishop b5. I like knight f6 here. If they go e5, you go knight e5. If they go knight c3, you go knight c7. And it's a bit of a weird maneuver, I know. Knight f6, knight d5, knight c7, you hit the bishop. Bishop takes on c6, you take with the pawn. Then you can go knight to e6, and you control these squares. I had a weird game against the 2200 in classical that I did end up drawing, but I had an equal position, a good position, but I like blundered a full pawn, and then I had to make a draw with them. Okay. As opposed to e5, yes, I'm going to show some other variations rather than e5 as well. Rather than e5, a lot of people go knight c3. Then you go queen c7. Castles, you go knight d4. If they take, this is a bad move. Knight e2, you play queen c5. Oh no, sorry, I thought you played queen c5. You play a6, bishop d3, and then e5, I think. And then on c3, you can just play d5, lash out. If they capture, you're going d5, e4. Bishop here, you have d3. You're marching them down. So taking is not good. They shouldn't take on d4. If black goes e5 rather than knight f6. e5? Doesn't e5 blunder a pawn? Oh no, e5 doesn't blunder a pawn, because you have queen d4. Yeah, e5's playable. I'm just recommending knight f6. So like knight f6 is just what I've been playing, and I think it's a nice line. So anyway, the point here is if they go e5, you play knight d5 and knight to c7. You attack the bishop. If they take here, guys, can we please try and speak? I mean, like, I guess if you're speaking in, I don't know, is it Hindi among yourselves? Then that's fine. But like, I'd rather be able to read and understand what people are saying. Like, I know that you're just talking about like school or something, but it's just a moderation problem. Okay. Knight c7. The point is that after takes, I have knight e6, and then the d4 square is nicely covered. So if white does something like castles, you play knight e6, d3, g6, bishop e3, say bishop b7, queen e2, and black's just doing well. You'll play b6, you'll put a knight in the middle, bishop can come out anywhere, and black honestly just gets a good game. Black gets a good game. So we don't have to cover that much more in that opening. There's not a whole lot of memorization. It's not super sharp. This one's a little bit more sharp. If they go knight c3, queen to c7, castles, knight d4, rook e1. You need to know a6, bishop to f1, and I believe it's knight to g4. And this is a very tricky move, knight g4. Because obviously if they take here, you have mate on h2. You don't watch the Olympiad. I will be looking through games from the Olympiad, and then I'll be doing a recap on it later today. So I'll pick some of my favorite games. I don't know how the games are going at the moment. I might actually check in on that if people are interested, but I'm going to finish up with this line first. Okay, so knight g4 is a tricky move, because obviously if their knight takes, you have a mate. And if they play h3, you have an instant win here. Knight f3, queen takes, queen h2. Okay, so there's a really tricky gambit here with e5, knight takes e5. No one knows it. No, not knight takes e5. I mean, an e5, e5, knight f3, queen f3, knight e5. Very tricky gambit. People don't know it though. Instead, most people just play g3, and you have knight f3, queen f3, knight e5. Queen goes to e2 most of the time. Then you play e3, and you can play moves like b5, bishop b7, bishop goes to d6. You can also play g5 often. You don't have to castle in this setup, and it's really just quite solid. So those are your main ideas. I would recommend, if you want to do a little bit more learning on this line, I'm not going to be able to go in super depth, because we have been streaming for a while already. But if you want to go into more depth, I'm just giving you the starting place, really. You can find your own Grandmaster games, and really, it's just trial and error. You patch up your own repertoire, you see what people are playing against you the most, and that way you can build a repertoire that best suits you. Okay. So I'm going to go all the way back. c5. We have, I think we've not covered this line yet. d4, takes, g6. All right. So back with g6, knight c3. There's one more important line I would like to show. Actually, two more. Bishop b7. And on bishop to e3, knight f6, f3, castles, what I wanted to show is the move bishop c4. Because on bishop c4, you have queen to b6. And this might look scary. You're jumping into the line of fire of the knight. Oh, what about this move? Queen b2. Game over. Knight hangs. This knight hangs. You win. So you're not actually in any danger of discoveries. There's no other way to guard the bishop and move away. If they move somewhere else, you just take the bishop. Alright? So most people go bishop to b3, but now you have a tactic that wins the game here. So if anyone in the chat wants to give it a go, there's a winning tactic. I'll give you guys some time to think. I might actually just go on a break for a bit. I'll leave this on screen. I'm going to have a 3-minute break. But if you guys want to try and solve this position, that is correct. But the question is, did you guys consider the move knight d5? That's the real question. Because if you didn't consider knight d5, then you made a small slip up there. Read your upper chat. Give me the mindset you expect opponent to play a move. Well, if you're playing someone who's just going to play things completely crazy, you should still... What you want to do is you want to put yourself in their shoes. You need to know the principles. So this is for Evil Nightbot. You know the principles, right? You know you want to control the center, develop your pieces, etc., etc. You know what you want to do. You want to put yourself in their shoes and try and come up with the best follow-up that you would make to your move. And then once you've come up with a couple of best moves for their move, you need to try and think, of course it branches, then you go back to your side and you think, okay, what would I like to do as a response? And if you try and come up with your best follow-ups for them, and they don't play one of them, then it's probably a bad move. And then you can try and use like backwards reasoning to try and think of why it's a bad move. What does it not do? What is its shortcomings? Does it move a piece to like a defended square or something? It will often be quite simple. So yes, I have read your upper message, Evil Nightbot. That's what I would recommend. Use the principles to derive what you think their best move is. If they don't play a move that you think is best, then either your understanding is a mistake. It is Queen A4, yeah. Queen A5, yes. If they make a move that you think, that you think is wrong, then either your understanding is incorrect, and that's something that you need to work on developing your own understanding. Oh, you see the line. You blank out when playing a game. It is hard to keep focus. It is hard to keep focus, absolutely. But yes, it's Queen A5, C3, and here things are getting messy. Things are getting very messy. And you will have, these are the sharp positions that you just have to know, okay? So what will be the follow-up here, guys? Yeah, so back to what Evil Nightbot was saying. Yeah, you want to try and find your opponent's plans, but the best way to do that is to try and put yourselves in the opponent's shoes. So just pretend that you're them, coming up with the best moves. And this actually can really help. I would genuinely try sitting down at a chessboard, physical or online, doesn't matter. Try and play a game with yourself out of the opening that you want to play. You want to try and learn your opening from both sides. Don't just learn one set of moves. If you can't come up with an idea for your opponent, then they're either screwed and they have no idea and they're just losing, or you're not trying hard enough to try and see what they're up to. So even walk around to the other side of the board, try and come up with something for them to play. Completely switch your mindset. Pretend it's them you're playing. Pretend you're playing as them, I mean. So yeah, after C3, what are we doing? What are we doing, guys? Move here is knight to c5. You're threatening the bishop. Exactly, knight to c5. And the knight on e7 is not actually threatening the the knight on d5 is not threatening the e7 pawn, because our knight on c6 is carding it. But things get complicated. Knight takes on c6. You'll take with the b pawn. They take on e7. You move your king. Now they have to take on c8. If they don't take on c8, you have rook e8. You pin and you win because they haven't castled yet. So they have to take on c8. You can take with your rook. They castle. And here, I believe rook f8 is best. You attack the bishop, bishop f2, and you play like king g8. Or rook cd8 first, queen c2, and king g8. And now, what you're going to do, you've got your rooks in the center, bishop is nice. I mean, black's just cruising. Black's in a good spot. Queen b5 is slightly better to stop bishop c4. So if you can include that, that's even better. And if they take on f2, of course, you have infiltration with rook e2. Queen has to move somewhere. I don't even know where the queen would move. You can double up, get a good attack. Knight d3 comes. So this is definitely one way you could treat the position. Why not rook cd8 and knight d3? Wait, sorry. On queen c2, you want knight d3. Well, there's bishop f7 now. There's bishop f7 here. So it's important that you play the move queen b5 so that on bishop f7 you have rook e2. You've watched a lot of videos and they say beginners should not play blitz and bullet. I think they're wrong. I think you should play blitz. Maybe not bullet. Bullet's just a mess. But if you want to play bullet and you find it fun, go for it. I think saying you shouldn't do that is terrible. Because you should be able to do what you find fun. Of course, you're going to get a little bit more improvement probably playing rapid and analyzing them, but you can also get a lot of value out of analyzing your blitz games if you do it properly. Yeah, bishop f7. That's why king g8 is often played later on. Anyway, that's the most forcing continuation in that line, the only one you need to know. Alternatively, if they haven't played f3 and you castle, and they play bishop c4, this is another very critical line, very sharp. Bishop f4, castles. Let's say that they have to play bishop to b3. If they castle, what's the move, guys? What's the move if they castle? It's very thematic. You've already seen it in a very similar position. I'll move my mouse off the screen so you guys aren't distracted. Give it more time. If people have just joined, I'm giving you guys a bit of try and find the best move. Central fork trick, exactly. Center fork trick, d5. Black's more than equalized here. Knight c6 is best. Yeah, it's knight takes in the center fork trick. And let's say they play bishop d3, takes, you go queen c7. Bishop to e6, rook d8. Rook d8. Black's slightly better, you'll push your c-pawn forward, and then you'll eventually have a majority on the king's side, and you'll have to try and grind that one out. But black's doing fine. That's all you need to know. Okay. But they're not going to play that. Most people are versed with this. They'll play bishop to b3 and get out of the center fork trick. Now, I'd be interested if anyone knows what the theoretical move here is. If anyone's familiar with this line. I've made a video on it in a game that I was playing on the road to 2400. I think I might have been playing a master, I don't remember. But we had a very, very sharp game in this line. And I've had some nice wins as well. But does anyone know what the main line here is for black? Well, not necessarily the main line, but one of the most sharp lines.
the one that I like to play is pawn to a5. Exactly, it's a5. And the point of a5, e5 or e6, the problem with e6, chess Fortnite, is probably, okay, the engine's saying queen f3, which I didn't know, but I would say that after knight takes on c6, bc6, and e5, oh, maybe not, because you have knight d5. But generally, you don't want to play e6, g6, because, okay, let's say they play even something like f3. I guess it's d5. Okay, this was a bad example. They shouldn't take on g6. But supposedly queen f3 is good. I don't really know why, but you're never going to be able to execute d5. That's the problem. Because the queen is covering, the knight's covering, and the pawn's covering. But what you can do, after bishop to b3, is play a5. And the thing with a5 is that you want to play a4 and distract either the bishop or the knight from the pawn. So let's say they play a nonsense move. Okay? You can play a4. Bishop takes. There's now a deflection tactic for you guys. I would let you solve it, but I think I already spoiled a little bit by hovering. Knight takes e4. Knight takes. Rook takes. Skewer. Black's better. But they're not going to play a nonsense move. They're not going to play a nonsense move. They are going to play something like f3. Okay? And on f3, does anyone know, there's an absolutely wild move here that's good for black. It's basically the only move. It looks impossible. Queen b6 doesn't quite work. Queen b6 is knight f5. Guards the bishop, hits the queen. You can't quite do the same idea as the last one. And the reasoning for that is because they already have a knight on c3, so there's no queen a4 check. So when their knight is back here, pawn is back here, you have a check. So there's no check. So I'll give you guys another go. I might spoil it in another 30 seconds. Just because knight to e5, not quite. Knight e5, I guess you're trying to play like queen c7, knight e4. They have the move a4. I'm not really sure what your follow-up with knight e5 is. The plan's queen c7, they can kick it with one of their knights. Okay, I'm just going to say it. The move here is pawn to d5, which I'm going to give a double X gun. It looks impossible. And I gave you guys a little hint when I said it's the thematic move in the Accelerated Dragon. And if you guys remember me at the start of the stream harping on about the whole point of the Accelerated is that you get to play d5 in one move rather than play d6 and then d5. So d5 is a fantastic move here. Okay? And let's run through it. What if knight takes, you might say? Knight takes blunders the game. Knight takes, bishop takes, and where's the win, guys? There's a win here. This one's a lot easier. This is just a tactic. By the way, this is probably the last variation that we're going to look at. I don't know that I'll have time to cover. Actually, I can probably cover the line in the Alapin as well. That one's very common. I'll cover the Alapin after. Takes. Exactly. takes. Chip takes. And once again, e6. But the reason you don't quite have this, if they don't castle, the reason you can't go for this take. Bishop takes, queen takes. There's no e6 because there's knight to f6. And you would lose. So for that reason, you play f5 first. So that the rook now guards f6. And that way you can take with the pawn and there's no mate. So you basically reopen the threat of the trap. So on bishop takes, f5. Knight b5 is the main move. Takes. Now they struggle to castle. It's a pawn sacrifice, but you're winning it back quickly with the bishop. And finally, let's say they take with the pawn. This is the simplest. You go knight b4, and you will win back the pawn. If they try and hold on to the pawn, bishop f5. Not bishop f5 necessarily, actually. Oh yes, right, it's a4. You deflect one of the pieces away. Knight takes a4. You can play with the f knight. And with queen a5 coming in, the knight's pressuring the bishop, bishop f2 say. I think. Oh yeah, there is also bishop f5, queen f5, queen a5. It's a pawn sacrifice. It is a pawn sacrifice, guys. But you can see with the two bishops staring down, the good pressure here. The rooks can go to the c file and start to attack this one. This is definitely good compensation. Okay, now if you guys have stuck around this long, there is one last line that I'd like to show you, which is totally wild, and I'm going to let you guys do some more investigation on it yourself. And after that, I'm just going to show one simple way that I think you can pretty much refute the Alapin Sicilian, if people don't know what they're doing. But the line that I want to show you is in knight f6, bishop d4 castles, sorry, not castles, bishop d3, a5, and castles. This is the most ambitious for white. This line gets extremely wild. Yeah, you have stuck around a while. The line is a4, and knight takes a4, takes, and they go knight to b5. There is once again, I'm going to give you guys one more time to try and find this, the thematic move. What is it? Looks impossible, as always, but it's possible. There is a winning move here. Well, not winning, but it's the only move that keeps black in the game, actually. And this is an example of a sharp position. The move is d5. It looks ridiculous. I know. It looks like it hangs the pawn, but it doesn't. If the queen takes, then you have takes. You win the knight. Once again, if the bishop takes, you just win the knight. But it looks like they have bishop to b6. What am I doing? There's this ridiculous move, queen to d7. Exactly, rook a4. There's a ridiculous move. And they actually, this is very, very hard to play. Once again, this pawn cannot be captured. Okay? Now, the best move for them to play is queen e2. No one I know actually plays this, but if you do play like that, then you get knight d6. There's a stupid line here. It's pretty crazy. If they don't take, they lose. Then there's knight to c7. And you play bishop takes b2. You give up your rook for their rook, and you get an entire just congestion of pieces over here. It's insane. Why not rook a4 and queen a5? In which line? Here. Rook a4 takes queen a5. They have b3. The bishop guards the knight, and they can sack the rook. Oh, also they have c3 apparently. That guards the bishop as well. But yes, the move is d5. And alternatively, if they go knight b6, you play rook a5. And now you're attacking this knight. If they move their knight back, queen b6. The knight can't go here. The knight can't really go there as well, because you've got all kinds of stuff over here. So after rook a5, they're actually in huge trouble. Because you're going to shove the pawn down the center, and then you're going to win the knight. A lot of people try and bail. Doesn't work, the knight gets trapped. So really, all you need to know is that d5 is the theoretical move. There's good pressure on the a file. You're also attacking this rook down here. So if they play something bad, like, I don't even know, like this, you can often sack the rook, say bishop takes b2, and after rook b1, generally this knight's been eliminated, but you can even go knight c3 here, and even though you lose an exchange, you have got a nice pawn for it. And this is very, very playable with the big center. Okay, one last thing to look at in the Alapin before I end stream. It's probably dragged on a little bit, I know. So against the Alapin, my antidote, c3, knight f6. This works for any kind of sacrifice as well. If they try and play the, I can't even think, the Smith-Morrow gambit, doesn't work. Because you can just transpose back into this line. Takes, takes. You play d6. Knight f3, knight c6. Bishop c4. All you need to know is that you take this pawn in the center, you play knight b5, and you get a good game. Because after the exchange of queens, you're attacking c2 and you're threatening bishop to you're going to go bishop e6. You go g6 with bishop e6, bishop g7. You can castle, you don't have to castle. You get your rooks to the middle. You play chess. It's an endgame, but black's better. Alternatively, there's a funny trick. If they go queen to b3, you have e6. If they go a3, you have knight a5. If the bishop checks, you block. The bishops have tension, so they don't have time to take this guy. And if they do capture here, queen captures, they still can't take because the queen's hanging. So they shouldn't do that. And in fact, that bishop takes d7 loses. Because the queen has to move somewhere, you have knight d3. Game over. King moves somewhere. Boom, knight d3. Attacks the rook. Queen takes, you can take the bishop. That's a nice trap. Alternatively, if they block with the queen, bishop d7, bishop b5, you have a nice move, knight c2. Knight c2 is really nice. Puts an end to them. Queen takes c2, bishop takes b5, they can't castle. Rook c8 comes, knight c4, bishop e7 castles. Black's just clearly better. So if you could get something like this, queen d2 I've seen before, but then you have knight b3. Really, they don't have many moves. Knight has to develop. And you could even play something like queen d3. Take, take. You just have the advantage. They can't castle. Two bishops. More activity. And black is much better. So, I think I've covered about everything that I wanted to in this stream. The goal was to look at the Accelerated Dragon Sicilian. I wanted to cover d3. I wanted to cover the Smith-Morrow, which just transposes. I'll show you how that happens. Let's say they do this. Oh wait, sorry, am I? Yeah, no, sorry. Let's say that they play d5. You just take, and on c3, here, 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 you've transposed back into the Alapin. So that's not a problem. So I don't mess with the Smith-Morrow. So I wanted to cover Smith-Morrow, which I've done. c3. I've not covered knight c3 actually. I'll do that quickly. I wanted to look at knight f6, and I've also not looked at bishop c4 yet. So okay, I'll do knight c3 and bishop c4 still. Knight c3. I like to go knight c6, and if they go for the Grand Prix, the setup that I recommend is very simple. If they go bishop to b5, it's knight b4. If they go bishop to c4, it's e6. Castles, knight e7. d3, it's d5. Bishop to b3. Castles, there's no f5. You just win. So this whole setup just kind of neutralizes the effectiveness. If they want to get super ambitious, they'll play f5. But there's d5 again. You play this from white's side. Yeah, I don't really think the Grand Prix works very well against this setup. I mean, you can play it like this, but there's d5 again. So whenever they go f5, there's always d5. And the more challenging way to play it, I think, is bishop to b5. But even this, you just go a6, and then you can go e6 again. No f5. You can just develop your knight. Keep it simple. Threaten to capture. So I find that this e6 g6 setup pretty much just conquers. Like, it's all you need against the Grand Prix. So that's the Grand Prix down. Sometimes you play the setup from the white side. Yeah, no, I got what you meant. I just don't think... I used to play the Grand Prix as well. I thought it was nice, but I just don't think it's actually that challenging for black if they have good setups. And finally, we have bishop to c4. With knight to c3, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4. Just go e6. Right? Knight c3, they can't play it like an Italian. It's not an Italian. You have the center fork trick again. e5. Black's just better. You don't want to have to spend too much time studying this. e6 is the key move, exactly. The reason why bishop to c4 works in the Italian, but doesn't work against the Sicilian, is because in e4, e5, you've already moved the pawn 2 squares, so this bishop is targeting f7. But in the Sicilian, you've not given them that chance. Right? In the Sicilian, they can go e6. You're waiting for a dog gambit lesson. Maybe. I'm just going to show like one example of how you can try and continue this game. Knight f6. Let's say they play it well, they play d3, bishop e7, I don't know, knight c3, castles, bishop e3, the blunder, because of d5, for example. You're getting a fork, so this is, a lot of blunders are possible. So let's say they play rook e1. d5, takes bishop b3. You can try and play a6, b4, c5. I really like this way of attacking, because you want to try and take advantage of why this bishop is so bad. Let's say they play a4. You can play bishop d4, h6, takes. You can play knight d4, queen goes back, takes. Will I play a match? You know what? Chess Fortnite. Because you have stuck around for so long, I will play one game with you. Okay? And then I will finish up the stream. But yes, this position is just great for black. Look at this crippled structure. Bishop d6, bishop d7, queen d6. You can go for checkmate here. You can just trade pieces. The endgame's winning.